Matt Miguez has plenty on his mind, and he's ready to share it with the world. It's time to hear the Miguez Mindset.
Welcome into a Friday edition of the Miguez Mindset here on ESPN 103.7 Lafayette and 104.1 Lake Charles. 3 days away from the college football national championship, Michigan and Washington going to put on quite a show at NRG Stadium. But first, let's talk about some of the semifinals, and we'll start with the Sugar Bowl, talking about Texas and Washington. Joining me to recap that game and give his thoughts on the title game, he covers Texas for 247 Sports. It's Mr. Eric Henry. Eric, really appreciate you taking the time, man, on this Friday morning. How are you?
Oh, man, I am doing all right. Matt Miguez, anytime I get a chance to catch up with an old co-worker from the Underdog Dynasty days, It is always a good thing and a chance to appear down there. 103.7 Lafayette. I feel like I can't call myself like an honorary Louisianian. Is that the word? But I spent a lot of time between making the drive over from Houston to New Orleans, and then of course starting the year driving from Austin to Ruston to watch Louisiana take place. I feel like I spent a lot of time down in the booth this year.
Yeah, I can see that you didn't gain a whole lot of weight from all the food that you ate, so that's a positive.
Listen, that is absolutely a positive. I went a little hard on the food in the Sugar Bowl, but it's back to Austin's a weirdly fit city. One of those hipsterish cities where everyone's in shape, so it'll shame you eventually into getting in the gym.
Let's look at this Sugar Bowl game, 37-31. Washington picks up the win. Look, I don't think Texas played poorly in this game. I think the third quarter might haunt them for a while. What did you see from inside the Superdome?
A couple takeaways for me. One, you're correct. I don't think Texas played poorly. However, Matt, this offensive game, now that I've had a few days to kind of reflect on it, was very reminiscent of the Texas team that those of us who are around the team every day saw in the early part of the year. And I asked Steve Sarkisian this entering the week. That was the first thing I asked him when the team arrived at Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport was, how did he feel the 31-day layoff would affect them? And he said he felt, all the, for lack of a better word, cliche things, right? Hey, the teams were practicing really well. And he said they tried to emphasize speed on speed, good on good, to try to make sure the guys were still sharp. But Matt, you take a look at Quinn Ewers specifically in the first half of that game. There was a point in time which I believe he'd only thrown for 80 yards or something like 90 yards, just really an underwhelming passing performance. And that was indicative of the Quinn and of the offense. I should just put it on him that we got in the early going of the year, really before Jonathan Brooks came on and was that guy who, whenever the offense ran into a rut, it's turn around, give the ball to JB. He'll keep us on schedule. And if you take a look, Matt, against Texas Tech, against Oklahoma State, last two games of the year, the team put up 1,190 yards total offense, was clearly playing their best offensive football of the year. So that's step one. Step two, or issue two, I guess is just the buzzsaw, that is Michael Penix Jr. It's a kid who I had a chance to see his first ever collegiate game, Indiana at FIU 2018, feels like a lifetime ago. He's been that guy for a while. I mean, even before his time with Washington, a very accurate quarterback. I even saw him when he was in high school, both from the same hometown, Tampa, Florida. So, I mean, I've seen him play ball for a long time, but that's the thing. If you take a look at Texas this year, when they faced veteran quarterbacks, Dylan Gabriel, a sixth-year veteran quarterback, he carved him up. Same thing with Michael Penix Jr. And Matt, I asked Steve postgame, because from my vantage point, the big thing entering this game was, in my opinion, Texas's ability to rush with four men. Because if we take a look at the advanced analytics, Michael Penix very good against the blitz. His numbers, his completion percentage, almost 25 points higher against the blitz than it is against just a straight four-man rush. And Sark said he felt that the guys got home, but Penix just did a great job of stepping up in the pocket, eluding the rush, and quite frankly, a guy who's taking a little bit of heat here, and in my opinion, I think it's unnecessary, in Ryan Watts. Ryan played great coverage on a lot of these balls. Michael Penix just put it in a spot where only Rome Odunze or Jalen Polk and others could get it. So those two things, and then the last thing, which of course you led with, that third quarter, the two turnovers, CJ Baxter, Jaden Blue, those things certainly didn't help Texas's chances of winning that game.
Yeah, you brought up Michael Penix and his accuracy as a passer. it's different when you're in the building to see it. So I have to ask you, watching him, like you said, put balls where only his guys could get it. Just how impressive was it for him to play on this big a scale for the first time in his career and really just not let it phase him at all?
Oh, it was huge. And again, I listen, you can't compare the stage of the Sugar Bowl to, playing in Indiana or even high school. But I just got to emphasize again, he's always been an accurate guy. I think the big thing that surprised me, and maybe this goes back to, I probably have only seen entering the week, I'd seen about 3 full games of Washington. Of course, they play on the West Coast. It's hard to catch those games, but just his deep ball has progressed so much. It's one thing to throw the deep ball, let's not confuse arm strength with the ability to throw the deep ball. Everyone can chuck it 60, 70 yards downfield in today's college football, but putting it right there on your receivers, Matt, those throws, again, they couldn't have been placed any better if I had walked up to you and handed the ball right in your gut. And that is truly the fact of the matter. I know you've been up to the press box in the Superdome. You're up there at the 600 level, so you get to see it all the way up top. You got to kind of use binoculars to watch them play on the inside, but on the interior, as far as the offensive and defensive line. But when you're talking about just those throws, again, I couldn't have just dropped it in the bucket any better. So yeah, it was deadly accurate. Again, at one point in that game, I don't have his final numbers pulled up. I know at one point in that game, he's completing something like 86% of his passes. And again, it's against a Texas secondary. While yes, they struggled at times, it wasn't that they struggled, Matt, against someone just throwing the deep ball over their head. They struggled against Kansas State, against Houston, against TCU when the team had established big leads and, teams were throwing to get themselves back in the game and they were doing a poor job of tackling. That wasn't what happened, on Monday night. It was Michael Penix just throwing incredibly accurate deep ball. So all the credit to him, and there's a reason why he was the Heisman finalist in my mind. And I know we're going to talk about Washington and Michigan in a second, but I just kind of foreshadowing, if he's on this type of heater, look out. Don't coronate Michigan just yet.
Now, before we get to that game, because I do want to spend some time on it, walk me through that final drive for Texas. You get the ball back with less than a minute left. You're down 6. You move the ball all the way down the field. You get down to the 11, and then you just, credit to Washington, obviously, but you struggle to get the ball into the end zone. Walk me through that final drive and what you saw from the Longhorns offense.
That drive was a range of emotions. First off, Mr. Reliable, Jordan Whittington, one of the most well-liked guys on this team, one of the most well-liked Longhorns. He's a guy who's going to go down in Texas lore just for his commitment to the program, a guy's been willing to do all the dirty work. He ends up being the guy with the big catch downfield. I believe it was 41 yards to put them in position. Then, of course, they get the call there that helps them drive inside the red zone. I'll say this, and I'm not going to attribute this to Texas's red zone issues because the team did have some red zone issues throughout the year. But at this point, you got to throw to get in the end zone, no timeouts. Washington's playing the goal line. A lot of the conversation here in Austin has been, could Quinn Ewers have made a better throw? And Quinn, to quote him here, he doesn't like to play the what if game. Sure. If Quinn throws a bit more of a back shoulder ball, maybe he gives on that final pass, maybe he gives, the right out there a more realistic chance of coming down with that ball. But again, I just, the only thing that I think really, Matt, is my big takeaway is we're talking about this upstairs in the press box. Sark's decisions to and it's hit or miss. He did wait a little bit to call those timeouts on Washington's final drive, right? And I guess the thinking there is if Sark, in my mind, uses his timeouts a little bit earlier, maybe Texas starts our drive with a little bit more time on the clock, and it's not just bang, bang. But still, I don't think you can ask for 3 better shots at the end zone. Maybe in my mind, you would want to see JT Sanders targeted. So JT's probably the biggest body of the group there. But AD, when you're talking about a guy who scored a touchdown in every college football playoff game that he played in, going back to his time at Georgia. So no shame in going to him. All in all, again, I just think if you really want to nitpick, you say maybe a better throw, maybe a better back shoulder throw. Maybe you go to JT, or maybe Sark uses the timeouts in a different fashion that possibly could give them more time on that final drive.
Now let's look ahead to Monday night in Houston. Michael Penix, obviously one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Michigan's got the best defensive line in the country. Washington's got the best offensive line. Just what are your early thoughts on this game?
I was so impressed, Matt, with Washington's offensive line. I think, quite frankly, maybe being down here in Austin, we've seen good offensive lines take on the Longhorns, and we've just seen, it's been a consistent thread where the Texas Longhorn defensive line, for, as big of personalities as Byron Murphy and Devondre Sweat are, they're not the most vocal on social media. Someone calls them out, whether it's, the idiotic comments by Iowa State O-lineman Jared Hufford, and, and talking about they won't see what they've seen, coming to Ames at night. And then Sweat and Murphy just say, hey, insert time of game, we'll see, right? And then the same thing, because Michael Penix, and I think that quote was taken a little bit out of context in my mind, because what's he supposed to do? Say my offensive line is bad? Supposed to go in there and say, we're scared? No, he said, hey, we have a good offensive line. We think we can hold up. And Sweat and Murphy posted that time, Monday night, 7:30. And man, that offensive line, Matt, just not necessarily they held their own, but they did such a good job of knowing their quarterback strengths, knowing that if you can just give him space to step up in the pocket, he can make plays. That, to me, just to carry it over to the Michigan game, Michigan didn't overwhelm Bama. And Matt, that's not the Bama team of yesteryear, the one
Right.
that's, and it's no credit and not no shade on this year's Bama team, but I think if you ask Nick Saban in an honest moment, he would say, hey, this wasn't the best Bama team I've had over the past, decade, how many years. Michigan eventually had to just turn it on and say, okay, we're not going to lose this game. They can't come in and play that way against Washington. And the closer and closer we get to kickoff, the more and more I am kind of believing that this is the Huskies' year. I had said entering the Texas game that the only way Washington could win is if Michael Penix played out of his mind. And guess what? He did just that. He's not going to be scared. He's not going to be intimidated. The one factor that gives me pause is this. There's a big difference between having 31 days to game plan for a team versus having 7. And in that scenario, I'll be interested to see what Kalen DeBoer and his staff can cook up, because that secondary still isn't great, and that secondary, Washington, still isn't great. They're 120th in pass defense, and we'll have to see what that looks like. But don't discredit the fact that this is a coaching staff going back to the days at Sioux Falls. I mean, they've done it, just not on this level, but
Right.
They've done it, and that experience in my mind does play a factor. So I don't know if you're asking me for a prediction just yet, but I think this is going to be a game that it's going to be another competitive one, and it would not shock me to see the Huskies go all the way.
I have to put you on the spot. Give me a prediction.
I guess here we are, Friday, 4 days removed from the Sugar Bowl. If you'd asked me this question on Tuesday, I would have said something like Michigan 27, Washington 21. As I've gotten a little further away from this game, I'm thinking something like Washington 31, Michigan 28.
Yeah, it's going to be a great game, no doubt about it, Monday night. Eric Henry of 247 Sports covers the Texas Longhorns, joining us here on the Miguez Mindset. Eric, appreciate your time as always. Happy New Year, my friend. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Anytime, buddy.
Make sure you follow us on social media at ESPN_SWLA. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well at ESPN Southwest Louisiana. We'll be back next week to talk more about this national championship game, plus touch on college basketball and the New Orleans Saints. Will they be in the playoffs by Monday? Will they not? We'll talk about all of that and more next week right here on the Miguez Mindset on ESPN 103.7 Lafayette and 104.1 Lake Charles.